Hello and good morning. This is a decision session of the Executive Member for Housing, Planning and Safer Communities. It's the first decision session of this electoral cycle, and it's my first decision session. It's Wednesday, the 19th of July. And are there any declarations of interest? And I should say that as this is an enforcement report that we've got as ward councillor, some of these enforcement cases are ones that I've raised. However, as this is a report to note and there are no actual decisions being made, it's been decided that I have not got a conflict in that respect. Minutes of the last meeting was of the 16th of March with Councillor Craggill present. I'm taking it, as I wasn't there, that this is an accurate record, and I'm happy to sign that. And the third agenda item is public participation. We have two participants today. We have one joining us remotely and one present in the room. I've been asked if I can swap them round because Councillor Merritt has an appointment to go to, so I'm happy to do that. So I shall ask Councillor Merritt if he will speak. He's speaking on the impact of short-term lets and HMOs in the Guildhall ward and the council's enforcement thereof. You have 3 minutes, Councillor Merritt. Somebody's got to tell me when you've got 30 seconds. Crack on.
Thank you very much for that introduction and allowing me to speak first. I must admit, when I was canvassing in the elections, I was surprised at the sheer volume of comments that we got about short-term holiday lets, but also the volume of student lets in certain parts of the ward, well dispersed around the ward as well in terms of those comments, and the proliferation of both short-term holiday lets and student accommodation is obviously a major concern to a lot of residents in the area. And those concerns both stem from the immediate impacts of some of those properties where they end up being used for late night arrivals, noisy parties, or people returning in a very noisy, boisterous form from town very late at night or well into the early hours of the morning and disturbing adjacent ordinary residents. But the concerns also extend to some of the other impacts. In one street, I was speaking to an elderly resident, and he was just commenting on he reckoned about half the properties in his street were now either in short-term holiday lets or in student accommodation, and the impact in terms of community. And at certain times of the year, the street's sort of a ghost street. So it will obviously also impact, and this is one of the other concerns it raised, on the availability of properties for people to who live and work in York to live in. Cases of people saying, well, I was chucked out of my previous place because they wanted to turn it into a short-term holiday let. Those types of stories. And we know from the census, the 2021 census versus the 2011 census, the significant loss of the intermediate population with children, massive drops in all the age groups up to 55 plus. So we know this combination is having a significant impact on the housing supply, particularly for those who are looking to rent affordably. Because the other impact, of course, has been on rental levels. So there's some very important issues. I note in your report on page 13, paragraph 27, that you envisage the key challenge will be in terms of the HMO cases, which I can understand following the introduction of the amended rules in April. But I would like to ask you to particularly ask officers to look at both HMOs and short-term holiday lets, because one of the impacts that side effects of tackling some of those HMO cases may be simply to switch them into short-term holiday lets, which is not the outcome residents would like to see, and will not be good for the city as a whole, because that actually means loss of accommodation for your residents as a part of the process. So I think it's important that, in effect, a holistic approach is taken to the two sets of issues, so that we get the best result for the city. And I think that's
30 seconds, Dave.
Or most of my points. The other one, obviously, is about the number of properties that have gone under the radar so far. So obviously, making sure that we actually obtain the information on the true levels in individual streets, and not necessarily the official levels when you're coming to look at enforcement from the HMO point of view, I think will be quite important. Looking at the enforcement list, I can see properties in there that I've had concerns raised about, but I have also see the absence of other properties that I've had concerns raised about. So I'm not sure that we have the full picture here. The other obvious challenge is we need more. I think we probably need more resources if we are going to tackle this problem effectively.
Thank you, Dave.
Looking at the backlogs and the rise.
Thank you, Councillor Merritt. And as you can be assured, some of these issues we are discussing today, and others that you've raised, I'm sure the officers will address directly during our session. I appreciate you need to go now, but I hope you will be able to watch it back later. Thank you. Our second public participant is Councillor Mark Waters. He's joining us remotely, and he wishes to speak on HMOs and enforcement matters. Can you hear us, Councillor Waters?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Perfectly, yes. Thank you very much.
Right, well...
Start when you like. Right,
well, first of all, morning, Chair. It's the first time I've spoken at this particular decision session. There seemed very little purpose under your predecessor. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your input into the matters I've raised with you since the election. It was good to have Cherry Tree Court done it and dealt with after the previous 4 years of indifference. But what particularly caught my eye at this meeting was the planning enforcement update, as it's another part of your portfolio in urgent need of reform. First of all, I hope you return this function back to the requirement to report enforcement cases to ward councillors at the very least, or preferably back to full reporting to planning committees. In my opinion, the workings of enforcement are too opaque, and because powers are discretionary and only used to take action when expedient to do so, it's a very good get-out word, is expedient, and because of this it leads to some uncomfortable anomalies. For example, in my ward, noted in paragraph 19, officers have served notice and taken to appeal the erection of wooden stables in a horse paddock in Scorby that have little or no greenbelt impact, nor have drawn any sizable complaints, and yet refuse to take any interest in the illegal obstruction of the public highway by City of York Council Housing's unlawful gypsy caravan site on a prominent greenbelt site alongside the A166 that's been there over 4 years now. Consistency, there isn't any. Paragraph 20 details section 215 notices. All I have to mention to you, Chair, is the Magnet Osberwick Lane and the refusal for 5 years of the enforcement, or should that be non-enforcement team, to deal with that site. But what really drew my eye today was the resource now put into chasing up HMO licensing cases. It seems we are now seeing the hidden unlawful HMOs coming to light that some of us said were in existence years ago. Presumably the system will then do all it can to accommodate the landlords and certificates of lawful use will be dished out in droves whilst council tax residents look on bemused. And all the while other enforcement cases that concern residents are left uninvestigated, like breaches of planning conditions by large developers. That said, having mentioned HMOs, I'd like to request an update on progress in pursuing the December 2021 full council motion to reduce by half the HMO thresholds for determining C3 to C4 applications that the previous administration deliberately frustrated. Another student-led HMO application in Osberwick by London property owners was approved at committee yesterday. Residents are sick of this, and so am I, and action is needed. And I'm pleased that your colleague earlier seems to be as frustrated as everybody else now. This situation should have been seen in 2011 when the original Article 4 direction was brought in. As it seems I've got a few seconds left, Chair, I understand there's to be a visitation by Extinction Rebellion before tomorrow night's full council meeting. Can you ensure that enforcement officers are in attendance, and if there's any more stickering of public property, that fines are issued? Because usually when these people meet, there's an awful mess that the council taxpayers have to pick up. So that's me 3 minutes. You'll be pleased to learn.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. No, it's always a pleasure to hear from you, and I think you raise a number of really important issues. I'm not sure whether you're going to be able to continue to listen or watch, but we will raise during this meeting a number of the points that you've raised. And if I'll
certainly be watching later. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, and if I've forgotten any, Becky's made a note of them, but just drop me another line.
Right. Thanks very much, Chair.
No worries. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. And thank you to all the public participants. We will now move on to agenda item 4, which is the main item on the agenda, which is the planning enforcement cases update. And I shall hand over to two officers. If you could introduce yourselves, your job titles, and then introduce the report. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My job title is Robert Harrison, Principal Planning Officer.
Becky Eads, Head of Planning and Development Services. I'll let Rob go through his report first, and then I'll cover some of those issues afterwards with you, if that's all right.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the report presented before you today is to provide an update on the enforcement cases dealt with by the enforcement team. So in terms of background, the enforcement team responds to and investigates breaches of planning control. Those enforcement complaints can be extremely complex and time consuming. The investigation process can involve enforcement officers working on colleagues from those within the planning services and other departments within the council and externally, such as the Environment Agency, things like that. We've got cases that refer to them. And this complexity seems to add time taken to resolve planning enforcement issues. So, for example, a developer may wish to submit applications to attempt to resolve those issues and regularise them, and they, if refused, can then end up at appeal, and that can add many, many months, if not years, to a case. So, in order to make effective use of our resources, they're dealt with in order of the greatest priority, with the greatest urgency given to those causing the greatest level of harm, or where that would be irreversible. So that would generally be listed buildings or protected trees, which are category A. Those priorities are set out in the enforcement policy, which is online. Our policies, our powers are discretionary, and action isn't taken simply because there's been a breach of planning control. It should be taken where we're satisfied and it's expedient to do so.
having regard to planning policy and other material considerations, much in the same way of an application decision. So reasons for not taking further action might include the age of the breach, if it's existed for quite considerable periods of time, if it's de minimis, it may be permitted development, so it may have not needed planning permission, and in relation to the level of harm being caused. So where a breach is expedient to pursue, we would informally attempt to resolve that before we moved on to notices, and that can often involve letters, several warning letters from enforcement officers, and then it may end up in an application, an appeal. But then ultimately, if it is expedient to pursue, we're left with a package of notices, which enforcement notice, enforcement order, stop notice, temporary stop notice, breach of conditions notice, and 2 and 5 notices, which deal with untidy land. Failure to comply with those is generally criminal offence, so we would end up, we would first attempt to informally resolve that situation, but ultimately it has to be passed to legal for prosecution. So in the last year, 984 new cases were opened, 679 were closed. At the time of publication of the report, 722 remained open, and we'd served 7 enforcement notices. It's worth noting that the sharp increase in new cases opened over previous years, which are demonstrated in the report. So those cases that were closed, 105 were expedient to pursue, 57 were pre-development, 157 were not in breach at all. 145 were rectified following work undertaken by the team, which is quite a considerable aspect of what we do, trying to formally resolve it, and that can be quite time consuming. 29 were granted planning permission. Currently 31 cases are awaiting the outcome of an application. So in terms of the enforcement notice that will be served, 4 of those related to short-term holiday lets, an unauthorised direction of stables, which was mentioned by Councillor Waters, an extension and creation of a new vehicle access. A more detailed synopsis of those is in the enforcement register, which is an annex of this report, and it's also published online. So going forward, the key challenge for us as a planning enforcement team is the investigation of a large number of house of multiple occupation cases. I think you're aware they've come off the back of the additional licensing requirement that's come in. Those licensing are related to the 8 wards of Clifton, Fishergate, Fulford, Heslington, Guildford, Heworth, Holt Road, Micklegate, and Osbaldwick and Derwent Derwent. And those wards are recognised to have the highest densities of HMOs in the city. So in order to ensure that those properties benefit from the right planning consents, the licensing team have provided us with details of the licenses that they've been granted. And we've opened a case for each one to check that they're lawful. So as part of that, we've done an initial screen looking at the age and the permission status. Is any permissions granted or certificate of lawfulness is? And where that's not the case, where it's not found to be lawful, it would be investigated as if a complaint had been received from a member of the public. Just to provide you with a little update, since publication of this report, it's gone from 379 HMO investigations, and that's increased now to 574.
Sorry, HMO investigation.
Yeah, exclusively HMO. So we're not quite
500 how many?
74.
Wow.
70 had been closed at the time of publication, but that's only gone up to 115. So those were found where the planning permission, a certificate of lawfulness, or perhaps I had investigated it in the past. Yeah. So then moving on, where they are investigated, that assessment of planning merits would be much the same as had a planning act been received. So policy H8 of the local plan identifies the saturation levels that we feel are acceptable, and it's assessed against those set out in policy HA, any decision, as well as other considerations, parking, highway safety, neighbouring amenity and bin storage. Some of those we've got the luxury that they've already occurred, so we can look at other records of environmental health, environmental protection, etc. But yep. So I've got nothing further to add to the report, and it's recommended to note its contents.
Thank you. I mean, I think this is really interesting, and because as you know, and as having been a councillor for a number of years, this is one of the issues, particularly in a ward like mine and the wards that you've referenced in the report, where there are significant issues with HMOs, for example, has been the length of time that it takes once you've raised a matter and with the enforcement team, and they go out and say, yes, we think this is an unlawful HMO, and then we've said that this needs to cease its use. Is there any follow-up that then happens to make sure that that's been complied with? Because sometimes there has to be quite a long delay. So, for example, if it was a student HMO, for example, you wouldn't necessarily want to evict anybody at in the middle of a year, because you don't want to have half a dozen students homeless. So you say to the landlord, as of next term, you can no longer, or next academic year, this can't be a HMO. Is there any then follow-ups that take place to make sure that they have complied with it?
Yeah. So generally, if using a student HMO, we do. You did touch on the subject of cat evicting in the middle of term. We have to give we can't act in a punitive manner.
Yeah, it has to be reasonable.
We have to give them a reasonable period of time, which should often be the end of term.
Yeah.
And then the enforcement officer should then check that that's occurred. If that's not occurred, then we're into the process of notices.
Yeah.
And during that time, there'd be an assessment of looking at such as information from environmental protection, ongoing complaints from the neighbours. Are they having a party every weekend? Is there noise disturbance? Is there rubbish, parking, etc.? So that we're building the case at that point of is this expedient to pursue? If it gets to the end of term, they don't comply, then we put a notice on.
Yeah,
but we can't act in a punitive manner. Inspectors are quite clear on that.
Yeah.
When you are effectively making someone homeless, generally the rule of thumb is 12 months. That's been a pretty clear thread through appeal decisions from inspectors.
Yeah, right. That's helpful.
That
One point that Councillor Waters raised was about communication with complainants.
Yeah.
Do you want to pass that over to
I can
Becky?
answer this one before I.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Yeah, so we've updated our system. That was one thing that had been raised with us before, because if you're in an appeal process or a planning application process, I mean, at one point the inspectorate were taking 12 months to get appeal decisions out, and they might not hear from us for 12 months. It doesn't mean nothing's happening. It just means it's at appeal. So on our system, we've created a system of alerts that the enforcement officer has to update the complainant, and then that would be then ticked off the system to say they've done it, to evidence that they've done it.
Great.
So that's every 3 months. That's
every 3 months. I was just going to say.
Sorry, did I not say that?
No, you didn't mention that.
Yeah, every 3 months that's set out, and we would update them every 3 months now. That was taken on reflection, even if it's just it's still on appeal.
Yeah, I mean that's the important. That's the important thing. It's and obviously Councillor Waters has reflected it, and I'm sure other councillors have done as well.
Yeah.
And members of the public are thinking, what's happening? What's happening with this case? It's been a year. It's been and I've been I've banged my head on the table thinking,
Yeah.
How often have I got to keep writing in to you or to the officer and saying, you know, can you tell me what's going on here? Because, you know, we have a responsibility to our constituents as well, who've raised these matters.
Yeah, that's why we introduced it. We have listened.
Yeah.
Because obviously it is a frustration. You know yourself, if somebody doesn't reply, it is frustrating. Yeah. So we made sure that we've now got these triggers in place. There's not to say that we'll hit them all of the time, but we will absolutely.
But that's the process.
But we've introduced a process, and we will, wherever we possibly can, update people within them timescales. But
has that been implemented,
yes,
or is it about to be implemented?
No, we've implemented it.
Right.
Yeah, like it's a recent thing, but we have implemented.
Great.
And as this is as frustrating as it is, the enforcement process can take time.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it does. But when it does take time, it's because we've got to go through all the right process to be able to not have a challenge later on. Because obviously if we issue a notice, it can be appealed. We want to make sure we're in the strongest possible position if we get to that place.
So if it gets to the stage of a blatant breach, non-compliance, and you then think, well, we now have to actively enforce this, i.e. prosecute. How many cases do we ever take to prosecution?
Very little, to be honest. We absolutely strive to not have to. Unfortunately, we're getting to a few now that we're getting to that point where we're going to have to do, because we've just got blatant, for a better description, non-disregard for the notices.
Yeah,
and those are set out. I mean, they're in the annex.
Yeah, so we will go through.
Some of those are getting to that point.
Right.
Advice from legal is that we do continue to attempt to
find a resolution.
Keep giving them time. Why aren't you complying?
Yeah.
For example, we've had 215 notices, for example, where they've not in there that they've not complied. We've got out there and someone might have died. We can't launching a process. There's one in there.
My case, yes.
Where they've died, we can't prosecute. Someone else has bought it. Yeah. And then we're liaising with them. So that someone's committed a criminal offence. But there's a relative justification to keep working, because you can get compliance by not dragging someone to court. I keep pushing on and trying to avoid that.
Now, just a final bit, and then I will go to Becky for the points that have been raised in the by the public speakers. But this 10-year rule, which I suspect many people don't know about, that do you want to explain the 10-year rule? I mean, you've referenced it in the report. Right. So, for example, if there has been an illegal act, it's been allowed to continue. Well, go on.
Yeah. So where there has been a change of use, such as to
a HMO,
or a short, we would have a period of 10 years to then take action. Yeah. Once the notice is served, that clock stops.
Yeah.
So the notice stops the clock, and that's that.
Yeah, this is my point to come in, that we are a reactive service.
Yeah.
So we don't have capacity to go out there and check everything. So that's why we rely on members of the public reporting these issues to us that we can then look into. Yeah. So it's not that we don't have capacity to go out.
You can't see every house that goes on the property market.
Part of the Councillor Waters' point that I was going to cover is he mentioned about there was all these undercover HMOs, but unless somebody complains about them, we won't be in a position to do anything about it.
And you know, and I've often said to residents, you're essentially our eyes and ears, because we can't go through every house that goes on the property market to make sure that it's not bought by a landlord in an area that that has a significant percentage of holiday lets or HMOs, and it's, you know, and it works well. But the Article 4 came in April 2012. So we were now in 2023. So those HMOs that were set up in 2013, 2014, if we don't act on them, they de facto become
Yep.
legal. So are you prioritizing those cases that as part of the licensing exercise that we're now doing, which I think has been a massive benefit to the city and to you in being able to do your job? Are you now focusing on those ones that are the closest to being legitimised just by time?
Can I add? I've got 2 points to come back to you on.
Yeah, cool.
So the first is just expanding from what Becky said. So that act of the complaint from the member of the public or through you guys as councillors is the first aspect of identifying the harm. It's not just that there's a breach, there has to be a harm as well to start pursuing that as a...
Right, can I just come back on that?
Yeah.
Surely the act of harm is the unlawfulness of putting something in an area that is already beyond the threshold that we set down in the Article 4, which is then it's in and of itself a legal entity. Why is it for you to define what's harmful when surely it's the impact on residents of ghost streets, and I have them in my ward where there are 75, some streets have 75% HMOs.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's many aspects to that harm. Some of them are seen, some of them are not seen, but often that complaint adds weight to the case that there's an impact on amenity, the noise, the parking, and that then increases its sort of urgency and its likelihood of us being able to sustain in action if there's a clearly identified further harms. I think that's a better way to. Yeah,
sorry, I wasn't having a go. It's just that saying it's another HMO in an area where it's chock-a-block with HMOs. But it's not harmful because it's not noisy, or it's not got a parking issue, or it's not got this and it's not got that. For those people that are raising it and are complaining, or that you're picking up via the licensing arrangement, that's where does it make sense that's where then in and of itself it is a concern? Because we don't want a whole street. We don't want, for example, 90% of a street all being turned over into one type of usage class, i.e. HMO. And for 3 months of the year, there's nobody there, and and it then becomes attractive to other issues such as antisocial behaviour or whatever. Sorry, anyway, go on. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Then, the second aspect, wasn't it, was in terms of prioritising those that are getting lawful. Yeah. I think, so in terms of priority, I did touch upon that in the report, that would be category A cases, which are listed buildings, trees. And then these have been categorised below that we've been asked to pursue those. So that they would be ones that we would be pursuing. And in terms of the lawfulness aspects, that is something that would be looked upon. But this one's getting lawful now, we need to act upon this. Does it need a notice now? What's the harm? And there's quite a lot of aspects that are built into that decision, and it's quite subjective, and it's on a case by case basis. So they would look through things like has it been complaints through environmental protection, things like that, and you quickly get a picture of priority. I think one of a better description of how harmful, how big, what's the area like, is the parking particularly bad? So it's part of a wider decision that of all the other aspects that have been built into it. So is it approaching lawfulness, but it's particularly harmful, really bad parking. We've won loads of appeals in that area. There's a real strong case for it. I hope that provides you a
really
better
good. No,
explanation.
that's really good. That's really helpful. And Councillor Merritt just mentioned resourcing, and you know, and I you've got 744 cases that are open at the moment. I know that the resources are finite. Are you able to manage?
I think it's safe to say that there is a lot there at the moment, more than we can cope with.
Yeah.
So we are going out to advert for an additional a temporary resource to try and help us with that.
That's amazing.
It is only one, and if that still isn't enough, then we'll make a case for potentially more. But yeah, we're in the process because of the pure volume of what we're currently experiencing.
And I think I think if I can give one message to people, it's not that we're ignoring.
No,
it's not that these cases are ignored. It's just, you know, there is such a huge volume of in a city like York where there's a lot going on. It can be very difficult just to keep up with, just to keep on top of things. And that's not me defending you. That I think this is just me explaining it to everybody else, that it's not an easy world that you're living in. Becky.
yes, thank you. So I'm just going to run through a few of the points that I'll go through Councillor Merritt at first.
Yeah.
He was surprised by the volume of holiday lets. I think if people come to us, we can look into it. But as I said, if we don't know, we can't do anything about it. The noise and issues around the coming and goings is a planning issue.
Yeah.
So if it does need planning permission, we will look at that as part of the impact on amenity. But again, if it needs permission and when we get an application, we can work with other parts of the council if the noise becomes such an issue. And Rob's team do that with public protection. He talked about the housing supply and how it has the impacts. That's part of the thing that we would look at when the application came in. A holistic approach, we are definitely doing that. We have to, as Rob's just explained in quite a lot of detail, we have to take so many factors into account as part of the planning process. We're not just one thing, and it all has to come together. And then he talks about more resources, which we're working on one, because we fully acknowledge we don't have enough resources to tackle what we're currently dealing with at the moment.
Can you talk a little bit about the national framework? As you know, we've just done a consultation on, we submitted a consultation exercise on short-term holiday lets.
Yes.
Do you know when there's going to be any decisions, what those decisions might look like?
Unfortunately,
what would help? What would help you? What would you support?
We obviously went back quite strongly with our response to that and how we felt that there does need to be a new use class. Yeah. We do need more defined specifics. For example, as we've said before, for holiday let specifically, there's nothing that says after 30 days, that's when it becomes a holiday. There isn't anything. So what we have to do is look at it on a case by case basis. What Rob and his team have been doing is prioritising the ones that are causing the most amount of harm. Say, for example, the larger ones where they do tend to become party houses, they're the ones that call the raise issue, and we have served notices on them. So it's all looking at the degree of harm that there is, but we don't have anything specific from the government that says it becomes a separate use class at this point. So we're very limited in how we can say to the public or explain why we are and where we're at, because we don't have that yet. And ideally, we would like it. There's no indication, as far as I'm aware, of when that will come forward.
Right. Okay, that's useful. But when you do enforce, what basis are you enforcing on? Is it the noise? Is it the usage class? Is it can you stop a short-term holiday let from operating? What is the process if somebody comes to you and says there's a large party house going on, Can you look into it? What's the process thereafter?
Okay. So like I said earlier, everything, basically. So the process generally would be the officer would visit, we receive a complaint that's registered on the system. The case officer would visit, look through the evidence, read through all the complaints, get sort of build protection. Sorry. Yeah, so that'd be quite a good source of evidence. The neighbours generally would be providing evidence. And at that point, once all that's been put together in a sort of picture, then to say, well, is this expedient to pursue? If it's expedient to pursue, generally we would write to them and give them a period to comply and say, actually, we feel this isn't an acceptable use of this property.
Yeah.
It's causing harm to neighbours. At that point, it would then depend on the owner. So they may decide to try and put applications in, which can stall the process, but we have to give them their fair share. We have to give them their opportunity to put their application in. Or sometimes, if they just ignore us, then we can move to, or don't want to comply, we move to a notice. So they generally would use an enforcement notice against that, which we would give them. Not that long a period to comply, not as long as, say, as if you're making someone homeless, it would probably be generally 3 months.
Yeah.
And they would be and at that point they do have a right of appeal. So the ones we've served recently are at appeal at the moment.
Yeah.
But we've had some successes just through planning applications recently in terms of appeals, which have really given us a bit of confidence with that. And they've also quite useful steer, I think, in terms of the planning issues. And one of them,
so it's effectively case law,
even quite small.
The appeal is it's
very
not gone through
useful.
the courts, but it has gone through the Secretary of State through the appeal process.
Yeah, so even quite a small one recently, quite a small scale one was found to be unacceptable. So that's given us quite a useful toolkit and sort of eye into the mind of the inspector of how this goes forward with them. So yeah, so I think, does that answer your question?
Good, yeah, it does. Yeah. Sorry, Becky, you're now going to cover Councillor Waters' points.
So one of the points that he made, he said he felt that there was an urgent need for the reform of the enforcement service. I don't necessarily think that's the case, because as we've gone through in quite a lot of detail, enforcement is really quite complex, and we've got to go through all the right procedures. And as frustrating as that may be, it doesn't mean to say that what we're doing is wrong.
No.
We've now resourced within the team better than we have been for a while. We've got trained officers that are progressing things. We are looking to expand. We are doing everything that we're supposed to be doing. It's just the process isn't necessarily always as quick as we would want it to be. Or you might not always agree with, as is the case with Councillor Waters, which I'll go on to in a minute.
Yeah.
You might not necessarily agree with the action that we're taking and how we're doing it, because you might not agree with the level of harm that you think there is. So it's difficult, but we are doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing.
But you're also dependent on the legal department as well.
Yes, very much.
I just
so.
wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about
No,
that.
I think there has been issues in terms of resort. We did lose one of our planning solicitors last year, which had a massive impact on how quick we could progress things. We haven't been able to recruit to that role. The legal services are looking at other ways, and they have brought in a different resource, but that has an impact on us. Yeah. As with all planning, if some other service within the council is struggling, we rely on them. That is so and legal will acknowledge that officer leaving had a huge impact. Yeah. How many notices we could.
And I think that's helpful for people to understand that it's not, you may have got it right to the end stage and you're then waiting.
And then we can't get it any further, because obviously we work so closely with legal with the notices because they've got to be right.
Yeah.
Because if they're challenged and they fall,
Yeah.
that's doing nobody's advantage, is it? So that is part of it.
And it's expensive.
It's really expensive. I mean, and we've got to protect the public purse. That's our
Yeah.
job, isn't it? We can't put the council at risk of cost by doing something wrong.
No, exactly.
You talked about information about cases to members. And we've spoken about this on various times, but if a member has reported the case themselves, we will go back to them, and we've now got the procedure in place where we will go back. It's not appropriate for us to send all enforcement cases of every ward to every office, to every councillor as we did previously. We've had advice around that, but we will quite happily discuss any case with the councillor that has complained about it, and we will keep them up to date. That is something that we are trying to improve on. So yeah, in terms of taking action, he talks about 2 separate cases that I won't go into specifically, but we have to look at the planning merits of each case and whether or not we can take action.
Yeah.
That relies on a number of factors. Rob specifically spoke about if it's somebody's home, you have to give a longer amount of time. We have to work with other agencies in some cases, and that can take time, or we may not be in a position where we can take action. But it's all fact and degree on a case by case basis. And I think comparing one to the other is very difficult, very, very difficult, because the 2 completely different sets of circumstances. So it's difficult, and you may not agree with it, but we are proceeding in line with how we should for both cases.
Yeah.
He then talks about resources and HMOs that have been there for years. We've already covered this.
Yeah.
With resourcing, we can only do what people tell us about.
Yeah.
He then talked about the decision on the motion, which there was a decision.
Yeah, I'm going to come.
You're going to do
I'm
that?
going to come on to that.
Fine.
Because that's no longer right. So just in respect of the HMO thresholds, that will be subject to a supplementary planning document. The team that are writing the supplementary planning documents no longer fall within planning. They're now within the regeneration team, and that work, Councillor Waters, is ongoing, and I've already had a meeting about that to sequence when that's coming through, and that's I will be in a position to update Councillor Waters further on that.
But it is worth saying at the decision session that it did say that they confirmed that the current HMO policies are evidence-based, robust and fit for purpose, and that the consideration of a review of the local plan policy, local plan policy H8 and the HMO SPD will be deferred until such a time as the local plan is adopted, at which time the appropriate resources and scope can be considered as part of the ongoing process.
And it is.
And it is. That is happening.
Yeah,
this was a decision, and that is happening. So it's not that we're not doing.
No.
It is happening, but we have to follow a process of when the local plan gets adopted to then go follow the correct procedures. So
yeah, there
has been a decision, and we are.
But there is work currently ongoing with that anyway.
But that is
so
we do have to wait in line with the
right. Thank you. That's really super helpful. What I just want to go through now is the annex with you, which is, as you say, on public record. But I'm not going to name the actual addresses. But if it's all right with you, I will just go through the planning, the enforcement case reference. Is that okay?
Absolutely fine.
I'm just now looking at the ones that have been raised but don't seem to have an outcome against them. And if you could then explain why they haven't been finalised, that would be super helpful. So starting on page 17, we've got 22-00132. You say there's an appeal lodged on the 9th of the 2nd, 23, and that's in progress.
So
That was the unauthorised erection of 2 stable buildings.
all right.
Oh, you're looking at a different form to me,
Yeah,
aren't you?
Yes, so that's appeal decision is awaited.
Yeah, so that's waiting on appeal.
Yep.
18-00158. Cease the unauthorised use of the property as short-term let accommodation of under 3 months.
Again, out to appeal.
That's out to appeal.
Yep.
17-00403.
Appealed, that's now been subject to an appeal.
That's subject
That's
to an
now
appeal.
subject to an appeal.
Will you update that?
Yes, we'll update that within the next week because there's been quite a few changes. So
Yeah.
I think it's probably we've just done it online, but we'll do it again because there's been a few developments.
Yeah, I know
in
this was
few
prepared.
areas.
This was
Yeah.
prepared a couple of weeks. This was
Yeah, there's
prepared in
been-
June, wasn't it?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
just to clarify, this picture is constantly changing.
Yeah, yeah.
There's appeals lodged, appeals won, appeals dismissed.
Yeah.
Where it's dismissed, it has to be removed. It's quite a fluid,
Yeah, no,
ongoing
absolutely.
live picture.
So that one's subject to appeal, and that will be updated on the public record.
Yeah.
18-00720. Remove all hard standing from the land and return the land to grass as it was prior to hard standing being laid. Appeal dismissed on the 2nd of March.
Yes. So what happens when an appeal is dismissed, the notice effectively starts again. And the notice goes from the date of that appeal decision.
Right.
Therefore, in this case, the compliance period then became 2nd of June. Fortunately, we haven't seen compliance yet. We've got a letter out saying
Right.
comply, otherwise we'll begin the procedure that is prosecution. That can be quite a lengthy one. Repeated attempts to engage, why haven't you complied? You need to comply. Eventually, we'll get some that one that we've given them a letter to comply within 28 days.
So they've got 28 days to comply,
Otherwise,
non-compliance. So
we begin down the prosecution route.
you go down the prosecution route.
Yep.
Useful. Thank you. 20-00263. Remove all unauthorised storage containers in their entirety and reinstate the land as it existed prior to the breach of planning control.
So that's been inspected recently and it's now been closed. So
Closed.
that will be updated on the register.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Then 18-00175.
Again, that's recently been inspected and the case is closed. So
Case closed.
again, updated on the register.
Yeah.
Yeah, they complied.
So again,
They've
complied,
yeah.
complied,
Yes.
and yeah, perfect. So the system works.
Yeah, it is. Some of them, they don't
It
comply by
takes a
the
while.
period, but we'll keep
Some
chipping away.
It
and-
takes a while, yeah. No, totally understand that. 18-00550. Oh, this is a long one. Cease the use of the land for domestic purposes. Cease the use of the land for domestic purposes. Remove from the land all structures, features, items and paraphernalia associated with the domestic use. It's a really long one. Where are we on that one?
So, the notice was served. And we
Yeah.
haven't had an appeal on that, or we haven't had compliance either. On
Because that was the notice should have taken effect in December 2021.
exactly. So since that time, we've been attempting to get them to comply.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we haven't had compliance.
Yeah.
Instead of going to appeal, the owners asked the ombudsman to look at it.
Right.
So that's where
So it's with
that
the
in terms of,
ombudsman.
yeah, we're continuing to take that down the route, and we're finalising evidence to pass for prosecution, but I suspect that legal may wish to want to see the outcome of the ombudsman decision.
Yeah.
But it is ongoing.
Should that be
It's-
should that be updated in the postponement by reason of appeal and date?
No, I don't think, I wouldn't say that.
You wouldn't
no,
put that there?
No, that's just background information.
Oh, okay.
It is progressing as best
Yeah,
we
yeah,
can.
yeah,
but-
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. 18-00765.
That they've now complied. Again,
Great.
case closed.
Will be updated.
Yeah, that'll be updated on the
record.
register. All those that have been closed, we're going to update in the next
Cool.
week or two. Yeah.
And 14-00598.
Again,
Unauthorised fascia sign.
now complied, case is closed.
Right. Can I just flag up? That was raised in 2014.
Yes,
And it had a notice due to take effect in 2021. That's 7 years later.
I believe, I did work at that time, there was some resourcing issues back at the count, back in the team
Right.
previously, I think.
Because that's a long
That is a
gap
long one.
between notice of enforcement
Yeah.
and then action being taken, 7 years.
But we did get there eventually, it's now closed, but.
Yeah.
that's-
So then we've got 16-0027. Demolish the unauthorised building and remove all associated material and debris. Appeal dismissed 2020.
Yes, it was dismissed in the 2020, the appeal was dismissed in 2020. The applicant, or defendant, the
Whatever.
owner,
Yeah.
has then put a later planning application in,
Yeah.
which was dismissed earlier this month on the 4th of July.
Right.
So you can
So
see
that's
where the time
Two
goes.
lots of appeals, both dismissed.
Yeah, exactly.
What happens next?
So we've wrote to them the day after. So it was quite
So they've
quick.
got 28 days.
Yeah, saying the building should be demolished. I'm not sure the time period for that one actually, but we've wrote to them saying the building should now be demolished. I think you're at the end of the line now after all those appeals and applications.
Yeah.
That should compliance now.
Cool.
Okay, we'll pass it to legal.
Cool. Right, 16-00041, removal of skip. Notice due to take effect in end of January 2019.
Yeah, this we talked about earlier. The owner died, sadly.
Oh, that was, right, that
Yeah.
was. my
So we now
case
have a
then.
new
That was
owner
completely
and a
different
new
case.
tenant
Right,
who knew nothing about the notice for
Right.
whatever reason.
Yeah.
We're now working with them to ensure compliance. As we said previously, we're not a punitive service.
No.
We're not a punitive function. So where things like that occur, we try to,
reach an accommodation.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. 13, 00094. Remove the lights and signage to make good the fabric of the building. Notice to take effect in 2019, 6 years
Yeah,
later.
this one's quite an old one. Again, we're working with them at the moment to secure.
Still hasn't happened.
Yeah, it's still outstanding. The case officers, I believe on this one, I think there was an application that was remaining valid for quite a while. But we're trying to get a new application in for something to replace it that's more acceptable. And then,
Right. Well, it's not the most egregious breach of planning.
No, and it's quite
It's 10-year old.
it's quite old, but it's low down the priority list. But we'll keep chipping away at it, and hope they've as far as I'm aware, offering compliance and engaging in the sense of putting a new application for new signage. So hopefully that would resolve it.
16-00261. Remove the unauthorised first floor wooden walkway and balcony. Stairs. Should have been done in 2019. What's happening with that?
That's now complied, and again,
Great.
closed, be removed from there.
Perfect.
Matters closed.
Yeah.
Complied on the register.
Right. 17-00229. Single story, unauthorised single story extension. Again, 2019.
Sorry, I'll just have to find that. It's not on this. I've got a synopsis of them. 17, what, sorry?
17-00229.
What, about 29? Right, off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure about that one. Can we provide that?
Can you
one?
feed that back to
At
me?
a later date, is
Yeah.
that acceptable? Right.
Then, oh gosh, 18-00042, unauthorized structure and tower. Oh no, that one's been done. Sorry, that one's been done. 17-00256, unauthorized cessation of use of the property for repair of motor vehicles. 6 months notice, should have ended in 2019. What's happening there?
So there's a legal complication in terms of the service of the notice with that. So we're going to have to withdraw the notice and reserve it. That's been approved by the head of planning, as well as the chair and vice chair planning committee.
Right.
And it's with legal department service. So.
Right. 16-00446. Appeal dismissed in 2020. What's happening there?
So part compliance. And we've given them till the 17th of August to finally comply with the last aspects of this.
Right.
It's hoped that this long-standing case will be resolved without the need to prosecute.
Right.
We hope.
Good. And those are all done. Those are all done. Those are all done. Right, there's one. 16-00423. Mixed use. Appeal against enforcement notice determined 30th of the 10th, 2018.
Yeah, they've now complied with that.
Right. So you're going to record that and close it. Yeah.
Because it has been closed, so it'll be just updated.
Yeah, all right. Updated and closed. Yeah. 2014, right, 13-00182, another fascia sign should have been complied with in 2014.
I've only got the annex going back as far as 2015. Oh, the motor vessel till. I'm sorry.
This is the one on Tanner Road.
I think any further ones, we're gonna have to give you an update out.
Yeah.
We've the ones that we've had all the updates for is what we've given you so far. Anything else we'll give you? No, we haven't got a detail. We haven't done the detail.
You haven't done that, right?
No.
Well, that's fine. If you can just feed back,
We will.
if you can feed back to us. Right. So thank you very much for all of that. Sorry to have gone through it, but I thought it was interesting. And useful to know, not just for me, but also I think to know that these cases are ongoing and that they are being followed up on. So the recommendation is for me to note the report. I think we've covered it in quite some depth. So duly noted. And I don't think there's any other urgent business not been raised with me. Anything you want to raise? No. Great. Well, that's the end of my first decision session. Thank you very much, everybody.